So perhaps you created your trust 10, 15 years ago and you're wondering, does it still apply to me? Should I simplify it? What would that even entail? I want it to be easy for my successor trustees to carry it out, and I don't want to have a lot of tax complications, but what should I do with that? Today we're going to be talking all about simplifying your trust and specifically whether or not you need that A-B split at the first death for married couples. When we're looking at simplifying our trust, it's important to have a small history lesson to see why do we need this in the first place. All right, so for a long time, the estate tax exemption was very low. It was like up to $650,000, then it went to $1 million, then it went up to maybe $2 million, then it went all the way up to $3.5 million, all right? And then in 2011, it was scheduled to sunset for a year. There was no estate tax at all, and then it was supposed to go back down to $1 million. So since the estate tax exemption was so low, that's one reason why we find some complications in trusts. The other reason why we find trusts to be more complicated in the past was something called portability. So to port is to transfer, all right? So for an estate tax exemption for a married couple, way back when, before 2013, it was basically use it or lose it for the estate tax exemption. You had to capture it in something we call the B trust, okay? So you used it up or you lost it, all right? So starting in 2013, we got something called portability. So to port is to transfer. So you're able to transfer the deceased spouse's unused estate tax exemption to the surviving spouse. So now the surviving spouse can get all the money and they can also get all the estate tax exemption. So I have a handy dandy chart about this A-B split. So this is typically what you see when you see a trust that was created before 2010, 2013, maybe even 2015, because the law was still pretty new then. So you have, this is the married couple, and then at the first death, it would split into two subtrusts, the A trust and the B trust. So the A trust is the survivor's trust. The B trust is the deceased person's trust. So it splits about in half. Half of the trust assets go to the survivor's trust, half to the bypass trust. So the bypass trust would use its estate tax exemption, yay, and then the survivor's trust keeps going. Well, there's some drawbacks to doing this split, okay? One of the drawbacks is that it has to do with capital gains taxes. So I want to kind of walk you through capital gains tax. Let's say that, I buy a house for $100,000 and it goes up to $1 million and then I die. Then it's as if I bought it for $1 million. And the person who inherits it can receive it as if they bought it for $1 million, and then they can sell it, and there's no capital gains tax exposure. So the moral of the story is it's really nice to die and still own assets, right? Because everything that you own at the time of your death gets a full step up in the cost basis. So let's see how that relates to this chart. So we have the family trust. At the first death, everything gets a step up in cost basis because it's all part of, in California, we have community property. It's all part of both spouses' estates, okay? Now, at the second death, the survivor's trust, when the survivor dies, their trust gets another step up in cost basis, which is really nice. However, the bypass trust does not get a second step up in cost basis because it's outside of the survivor's estate. So anything there, when it goes to the people who are receiving the money, they receive it as if they had bought it at the time of the first spouse's death. However, the bypass trust is really good for estate tax protection, all right? Because anything that goes into the bypass trust can grow and grow and grow. It's outside of the survivor's estate. So when the survivor dies, it goes to the kids or wherever else free of estate taxes. So people who have larger estates typically prefer this A-B split because the bypass trust protecting that estate tax exemption is really important for the survivors, for the bypass trust. And you're not as concerned about capital gains taxes because, as we put it, capital gains tax is an elective tax. That means you can, choose not to sell something. Now, what happens while the survivor is alive? Well, the survivor can get all the income from the bypass trust. It all goes to the survivor and as much of the principal as they really need. But the principal is captured in the bypass trust. The bypass trust becomes irrevocable. So that's another reason why people really like this AB split is because the deceased person's half goes into an irrevocable trust and it can't be changed by the survivor. The money, upon the survivor's death, the money must go where the deceased person said. So I find that people who have been through, if they have a blended family, if there's some sort of complications regarding distribution, a lot of married couples will prefer to still do an AB split for control purposes, to make sure that the first person to die gets to decide where their money goes. So it doesn't end up going to the pool boy or the second spouse or the guru or the charity. Instead, you make sure that it goes to your kids or where you want it to go. Okay, but let's say that you're not a blended family, you're not as concerned about control, you don't have a taxable estate, which in 2023, that means $12.92 million of estate tax exemption per person. So it's almost $25 million of estate tax exemption protection for a married couple, okay? Let's say you don't have that. Well, do you need that AB split? Probably not. So I've simplified a lot of trusts, and now this is what they look like. So here we have the family trust. At the first death, everything goes to the survivor's trust. And then at the second death, everything goes where the survivor says. Now, there are some drawbacks of that, right? The control issue. The survivor has full control over the survivor's trust. You can say, I want it to go somewhere else. However, if it's not a blended family, usually, parents will agree on where things go. Okay, so sometimes we call it an I love you trust. Honey, I love you. I trust where you're going to have this go. We also set up a disclaimer trust. This is basically an elective B trust. So the surviving spouse can opt to disclaim or say no thank you to whatever inheritance they're receiving from the deceased spouse. Now, I have to tell you, in my 13 years of practice, I have exercised a disclaimer trust exactly once, and that was for California property tax purposes. Okay, so hardly anybody disclaims, but we have that in just in case. However, everything flows very nicely. Another really nice thing about simplifying your trust is for income tax purposes. With this method, the survivor only has to report an individual income tax return on the survivor's social security number for all the money held in here. You do have to report the income, but it's see-through, so it's taxed according to that survivor's tax bracket, okay, not the trust tax bracket. However, when you compare that, the AB split trust, this is where a lot of complication takes place, because for the bypass trust, you need to get a separate tax ID number and file separate tax returns each year. So it can be quite a pain. All right. So ultimately what I'm seeing is a lot of people choose not to do the AB split. They don't want to deal with the complicated income tax reporting. They don't have an estate tax issue. They want to get a full step up for capital gains tax purposes. And they're not too concerned that the survivor is going to redirect things upon the survivor's death and not to the children or wherever they originally chose. I hope that gives you some food for thought as to which approach would work well for you and your family. I have a really good video about estate planning basics, and I think that will also illuminate you as you're thinking about your revocable trust and different drafting options. So I'll see you over there.